Here we are. The presenter is welcoming the participants in this second session, which is one state of or two-state solution. This is a session is organized by Al Jazeera Centre for Study in cooperation with Al Jazeera Mubasher. Recently, the one-state solution gained momentum among some Palestinians and has become the subject of more discussions than before, especially after Trump administration adopted the deal of the century. In addition to that, the two-state option is eroding due to Israeli policies, the most prominent of which is the Judaization of the state. This session will discuss these two options in light of the consequences awaiting the Palestinian cause and whether there are other options. The speakers of this session will be Dr. Mustafa Barghouthi, Chairman of Palestinian Initiative Committee and member of the Legislative Council, and Dr. Adnan Abu Amir, Professor of Political Science in Ummah University, and Dr. Ghada Karmi, Lecturer at the University of Exeter, and John Aldidice, Chairman of the Centre for Conflict Resolution at the University of Oxford and member of the House of Lords. Welcome, all of you. And the first question is to Dr. Mustafa Barghouthi, the head of the Committee of the Palestinian Initiative. After a whole year of negotiation, this two-state solution, is it still feasible or could as a permanent solution between Palestinians and Israelis? Mr. Barghouthi says that he is happy to be part of this discussion. He says, I think the right question is not the choice between one or two-state solution, but the question after a process that has been going for such a long time, more than 25 years of negotiations, where do we stand now? I think the whole idea of an independent Palestinian state and two-state solution was based on is an illusion, in fact, because it says that the Israeli Zionist movement is ready to have a solution with the Palestinians. But what happened since the Oslo Agreement, the Zionist movement does not want any compromise with the Palestinians, and so far no prime minister in Israel has accepted the creation of a real Palestinian state. Even Rabin, who they consider him as a man of peace, did not agree or approve that the creation of an independent Palestinian state, but only he said they should have autonomy, self-rule. Then Netanyahu and now the new prime minister, they are all against the creation of an independent Palestinian state. They all continued settlements and occupation in the West Bank. And they all tried to push the Palestinians into the idea of a very weak entity that does more than 33% of the West Bank, which they call A and B regions, divided into cantons, and put them and force them to accept one option, which is the two-state solution. So the idea of the state has just become something, an entity of self-rule that has no authority on the ground, on the air, on the waters, on the borders. And the policies of Naftali it is not different than others. It's all in line of the deal of the century of Trump, which was in fact written by the Likud. This development confirms that there was no idea of a compromise with the Palestinians. And that, in addition to the occupation and settlements of Israel and the ethnic cleansing that was practiced against Palestinians, now a new system is being seen, which is a complete apartheid system, an occupation system, which implements this apartheid on Palestinians, not only on the occupied country, and also those outside Palestine and inside. And this was proven by several reports, one of Esquad that was not published. Nadeem Khalaf was the head of this, and then the Human Rights Watch, and now another report that all say that there is an apartheid racist regime in Palestine, and that all the components of the Palestinians, whether inside the country or outside or inside the occupied territories, are exposed to the same this apartheid system. That's why I find this outburst by the Palestinians, because it's a reaction to the feeling that the oppression they are facing is the old same one, whether here or there. So I think the Palestinian strategic goal as a result of these factors should be changed and should not be limited only to put an end to the occupation within the two-state solution idea, but no, the strategic goal must be expanded to become not only put an end to occupation, but also toppling all the apartheid and discrimination regime applied by Israel in all historical Palestine. This is something we should agree upon. And the Palestinian arena should not be divided into those who accept or those who not accept or agree not agree. No, we should all agree on this strategic goal that it should include toppling or putting an end the apartheid regime, and that against all the Palestinians and the historical Palestine, not only those on the Gaza and the this is what I think should be adopted by all Palestinians according to what's going on the ground, what Israel is doing of changes and modifications on the ground to prevent any possibility of creating a state for Palestinians. In other words, we must not accept that Iran pushes into one option and then to encircle this option that's called the two-state solution to in a way that would end up with a self-rule under occupation. So the presenter is saying that, so she's summarizing what Mr. Barghouthi said, that is to put an end to the occupation. And now the question is to Ghada Al-Kermi, who is a lecturer at the University of Exeter. So, what are the options and the alternatives for any solution? And the one-state solution for both Palestinians and Israel is still viable in your opinion? The lady says it is necessary that we should focus on the question and then we discuss the answer. The question is, the Palestinian people, is it really one unified people with the same struggle and they all have the same goal? I think the answer to these questions is yes, because the outburst that we saw in May showed us that the people on the ground and wherever Israel is ruling, whether on 48 lands or Jerusalem or West Bank or Gaza, all these Palestinians at the same time they came up and they with the same time, and this has shed light on the unity between the inside and outside people. So any solution should be solve the problems of all these Palestinian people. So is the two-state solution a way to solve this problem? No, because the question is, what are the components of the radical final solution of the problem or the strategy of Palestinians? The answer is nobody can disagree about this. The answer is the solution, the basic solution that we should think of is the return of all the people who were expelled from the Palestinian territories in 1948 and afterwards. To compensation for the destruction and the robbing that took place since 48, three, a dignified life on the territories of Palestine with full rights. This is the solution we want. So the question should be, how can we reach such a solution? It's clear that two-state solution does not achieve this. Although that there's international agreement on this, and a big number of Palestinian people also want this solution of two states. But this means that my answer will be that the two-state solution present 22% of Palestinian territories and does not allow the return of refugees and does not allow for any compensations, and life will be without dignity and without rights. So how can we answer the question, which is, what is the solution? And we said the answers that the solution we want is what I just said. So what do we do from there? I think it's not that the Palestinian people and the leaders are not aware of this. No, they are well aware of that, but they want to follow the policy of something better than nothing. So if you take something small, little, for the time being, and then continue, maybe it will take us to the solution that we wish. The other way is that, and clearly should be said, we don't want two states, and we don't want that. And in fact, I'm not discussing this issue of Israel itself. Will not allow for this solution, in fact. But regardless of that, from the point of view of Palestinian people and cause, we either accept what's available and thank God for that, in the hope of that situation will improve in the future, or we should say that right from now, the solution we want is a solution of a democratic state with full rights for everybody, and that can receive and will receive all the refugees that will return. The presenter, so you agree with this? You see, this two-state solution will not solve the Palestinian problems. It should be built on three: on the right of return, compensation, and a dignified life. Now the question to Dr. Adnan Abu Amr, professor in Al-Ummah University in Gaza. For many years, PLO had a struggle against Israel, but did not have a lot of results. And the resistance in Palestinian went into 4 wars against Israel, but they are still besieged. Do you think the military resistance is still viable for the Palestinian people? The gentleman is thanking the lady, saying that the issue does not, it's not yes or no, the answer to your question. I am under occupation for more than 70 years, and despite all political agreements with PLO, nothing changed, and the killing of Palestinians continued. Today, the very day, 4 Palestinians were killed in Jenin, which is under the Palestinian Authority control. So that's why the resistance is imposed on Palestinians. It is a means, not an end, for the Palestinians to recover their usurped rights. That's why This is not something only to be rhetoric, no. In the past wars in Gaza, we found that the Palestinian resistance was able to inflict a lot of human and economic uh, losses on the on the Israeli occupation forces, although they are not equally strong militarily speaking. But all the struggle of peoples all over the world, in Algeria, in Iraq, and everywhere, has begun small and was not an equal force. But what the Palestinians are doing, they are sort of uh, waging a sort of attrition war against the Israeli occupation to attack the occupation, or at least to stop its expansion, as happened in Gaza. We are now celebrating the 11th anniversary of the withdrawal of Israeli from Gaza without any negotiations. So, if there was a nationally agreed upon project, we could have achieved better results. The Palestinian resistance tries to implement to make use of their legal rights in a way that they will not make the occupation forces enjoy what they are doing and live peacefully. The, and the Palestinians want to make the occupation forces by the Oslo Agreement have a sort of what he calls between brackets a luxury occupation. But the resistance is making the the Israelis' occupation costly for the Israel and the Zionists. Israel will always be a pariah country, hated, built on the land of others. So we find that Palestinians are suffering from different oppressions, but capitulation for the Palestinians is out of question and something that will not be accepted by any Palestinian. So the president said the military resistance the best choice and option. And now the question is to you, sir, Mr. Adrais. The question is to you. She's presenting you with your titles. The situation on the ground is that there is one state, which is Israel, which is applying apartheid and discrimination policies, just as was in South Africa. With this, is this something acceptable? And can Israel really accept the one-state solution? And can the West put pressure on Israel just as they did on West Africa in a way that would push Israel to accept the two-state solution?
شكرا جزيلا على هذا السؤال. إن فصل بلد إلى جزئين وقسمه إلى قسمين بسبب وجود شعبين أو مجموعتين سكانيتين لا يتفقان مع بعضهما ليس مستغربا، فهذا حدث في جزيرة قبرص وكذلك في جنوب أفريقيا، وحدث أيضا في الهند والباكستان، وكذلك حدث في بلد بين إيرلندا والمملكة المتحدة. إذن كان هنالك انقساما وفصلا في عام 1921. في نهاية المطاف طبعا ينبغي أن ندعم النتائج التي يمكن أن تتمخض عن المفاوضات. المشكلة بالنسبة لإسرائيل أنه لم يكن بالإمكان التوصل إلى نتائج. كان البعض يعتقد أنه سيكون هنالك حل دولتين ونتيجة كهذه، ولكن قبل سنوات، ربما قبل 10 أو 15 عاما، أحد أصدقائي والذي كان مشاركا في عملية مكافحة نظام الفصل العنصري في جنوب أفريقيا. جاء إلي وأشار بأنه يريد السفر إلى إسرائيل وأن يلتقي بالفلسطينيين والإسرائيليين وأن يزور الضفة الغربية وقطاع غزة ويتحدث إلى الناس ويتحدث عن الإمكانات المحتملة. عاد وألف كتابا، وهذا الكتاب نشر في عام 2015، وكان عنوان الكتاب يلخص المسألة برمتها، وكان عنوانه وهم حل الدولتين، وخلص إلى هذه النتيجة على أساس أن الواقع على الأرض لا يمكن من التوصل إلى حل دولتين. كثير من الأمور حدثت، الاحتلال يتوسع ويتمدد، ولم يعد بالإمكان تحقيق مثل هذا الحل. ولذلك هو وكثيرون تحدثت إليهم بشأن مسألة التوصل إلى نتيجة حل الدولتين هو أمر لن يكون ممكنا، وبدأ الحديث عن نتيجة تقوم على حل دولة واحدة، لأنه لا يوجد أي مؤشرات توحي بأن مثل هذه النتيجة يمكن أن تنجم عن مفاوضات ناجحة. سألت في ماذا كان الغرب عازما أو قادرا على فرض ضغوطات على إسرائيل. لا أعتقد أن ثمة مؤشرات توحي على ذلك، لا الرئيس الأمريكي السابق ولا الحالي. إذن في هذه الحالة ما الذي يمكن فعله؟ إحدى المشاكل التي يواجهها الفلسطينيون هو أنهم على خلاف فيما بينهم، لا يتفقون فيما بينهم، وبالتالي تم استغلال هذه الخلافات والفروقات من الإسرائيليين. نرى الانقسام بين حركة فتح وحماس، وكذلك غزة والضفة الغربية، وحتى داخل إسرائيل هؤلاء الذين يحملون الجنسية الإسرائيلية ولكن ولا يعيشون في حدود 67. التغير الأكبر الذي حدث مؤخرا هو أنه طفت بعض المؤشرات من فلسطينيين خارج حدود 67 يحاولون أن يوحدوا صفوفهم، وحتى داخل حدود 67 هؤلاء الذين يحاولون توحيد صفهم سياسيا ويدعون إلى تنظيم انتخابات، وهؤلاء هم أنفسهم يرفضون الاعتراف بدولة إسرائيل بوضعها الحالي. أعتقد أن مثل هذه المؤشرات تفتح المجال نحو نتائج مختلفة، ولكن أي نتائج يجب أن تنجم عن مفاوضات، لأن إذا ما استمر الوضع على حاله فإن الفلسطينيين سيعانون أكثر مما عانوه في السابق. لذلك من وجهة نظري أن حل الدولتين لم يعد ممكنا وقائما، وحل الدولة الواحدة سيكون أمرا يصعب التفاوض بشأنه والتوصل إلى اتفاق عليه.
Now we have come to the second topic of discussion, and we will give 4 minutes to each of our guests. Go back to Mr. Barghouthi. Why the popular resistance has not been enhanced in Palestine, and why is it only restricted to Gaza? The gentleman, I would first of all to say that when we speak about putting into the apartheid regime, this means that they put an end to all the Judaism of the state, and this also will mean the right of return of Palestinians, and that they will give not only civic rights but also national rights also. As for the popular resistance, there's something new. In fact, popular resistance has been deep in the memory of the Palestinians since the revolution of 1936, and also the first uprising, and then was the Day of the Land. The popular resistance increased in the past 15 years because of the failure of negotiations. We had some great examples: Bab al-Shams, Ahfad Yunus, Manatir, and many activities are very successful. We had the model of the ships to break the blockade on Gaza, and then the electronic war against the Palestinians, and then the last war of Gaza, and then the outburst or the uprising of Al-Quds lately in Sheikh Jarrah and Bab Salwan, and also lately in Jenin and Beqa and Beit Dajan and Kufr Qaddum. I think what happened today in Jenin is an example of that when the Israeli army attacked the Jenin area, regardless of the Oslo agreements and this the region that should be under the authority of the Palestinian Authority. 4 martyrs fell down today, this morning, as a result of the Israeli attack. That's why I think that what we have seen in a repeated way, but in waves, the popular resistance did not withdraw, no, but it's being renewed in waves, and latest of which was in Jerusalem lately. And I think there will be other waves until to come a real popular uprising, because the people of Palestine have no other option. How can this resistance be emphasized, and why isn't not being continuing? The first reason is that there's no agreement of taking a collective decision, and there's still a lot of sectarian or political party considerations taken in the taking position. And the second reason is that the Palestinian Authority does not expand the popular resistance in a way that cannot be controlled. This is because of the mentality of the Palestinian Authority counting on Biden and the American administration. But maybe here they should benefit from the lessons of Afghanistan. This old approach has been a failure, and the only alternative is to adopt the strategy of popular resistance. Finally, one of the main reasons that hinder the Palestinian resistance is that we need to overcome all these three factors to enhance and strengthen the popular resistance. I'm sure that this popular resistance will accelerate, and the beta example was the best, because this is a town that all people are taking part in. Depending on itself, it does not need support from any part, and they've been going into struggle for 100 years and gave seven martyrs and more than 170 people injured. Nevertheless, the fight is continuing day and night, and succeeded in putting an end to this colonialist outpost. I think this example will expand in a way that the popular resistance became a way of living for the Palestinians. The president is asked, so you think the president is deep inside the conscience of Palestinians and that there's no alternative to it, but there are some factors that are obstacles because the absence of a unified leadership, and because the leadership does not want to enforce the resistance. But you believe that resistance will continue. The question of Dr. Adnan Abu Amr. Gaza is under blockade for 15 years, and people are living a very dire situation. And they are being blockaded on ground, on air, and air. So what can be done in light of all this support given by the West to Israel and even some Arab countries? The gentleman said, in fact, if we see the resistance movements in all over the world, shows that the balance of power has never been in favor of the resistance. There is always, but at the end of the day, the the national will and determination and the support of the people will lead at the end to victories on the ground, on the battleground. Best example is what happened in Afghanistan after 20 years of American occupation. We find that only in a few days all of us collapsed like a domino. Ariel Sharon 2005 says that they can do whatever they like, but the resistance operations forced the Israelis to withdraw from all these outposts and settlements. The gentleman speaking through telephone, they have problem in hearing him. His voice is cutting, but I'm doing my best. But he says anyhow, the pressure, the, the the pressure made on the resistance will be useless because any resistance movement shouldn't expect from the occupation forces to welcome them and make life easy for them. No. Maybe the price might be heavy paid by the resistance, but I think resistance movements are politically mature and they can to mitigate the prices paid by them. The occupation forces trying or counting on isolating the resistance from the people support. That's why the resistance movements always try to maintain its their relations and their contact with the people in addition to other political issues, but the Palestinians will never surrender, will not capitulate. The presenter, so you also agree with Mr. Barghouthi that the option for resistance is the only one and there's no alternative to it, and the real betting by the is to separate the people from the resistance. But the resistance is mature enough to maintain its popular support. The question is to you now, Mr. Lardais, why the leaders in the West are so much attached to two-state solution, despite the fact that it's not applicable on the ground because of what Israel is doing by building settlements, evacuating Palestinians. Is this two-state solution still possible without any political will from the international community on Israel?
أعتقد أن أحد الأسباب التي تدفع الدول الغربية مواصلة الحديث عن حل الدولتين هو أنهم يرون المشكلة باعتبارها شعبين في صراع مع بعضهما البعض، وبالتالي ينبغي أن يكون هنالك حلا يعطي كل جهة نتائج إيجابية. إذا كنا نتحدث عن دولة واحدة تهيمن عليها ويهيمن عليها الإسرائيليون اليهود فهذا غير مقبول، ولكن إن كنا نتحدث عن دولة واحدة يهيمن عليها الفلسطينيون فهذا أمر لن تقبل به الأسرة الدولية والدول الغربية، وبالتالي فإن العالم والأسرة الدولية ما زالت تواصل الدفع تجاه هذا الحل، ليس لأنه واقعي لكن لأنه نابع من نظرتها إلى الأمور. وأنا طبعا أعلق على ما ذكره بعض المتداخلين فيما يتعلق بأن أي احتلال ينبغي أن ينتهي، ولكن هذا ليس بالضرورة صحيح. الوطنيون الإيرلنديون كانوا يعتبرون الوجود البريطاني احتلالا، لكنه استمر ل700 عام، وإذا ما أرادوا الانتظار لكل هذه الفترة فسينتهي هذا الاحتلال، ولكنهم اضطروا إلى الجلوس إلى طاولة المفاوضات. ما هو مهم بالنسبة للفلسطينيين هو أنه ينبغي أن يتفقوا على أي نتائج يمكن أن يتوصل إليها ممثلوهم. إذا لم يتفقوا على النتائج التي ينشدونها، وإذا لم يتفقوا على من ينبغي أن يمثلهم، فالأمور ستكون صعبة للغاية. إذا من دون ذلك فلن يصلوا إلى أي نتائج تلبي تطلعاتهم. أيضا من الخطأ أن ننظر إلى ما تمخض عنه النزاع في أفغانستان باعتباره نتيجة حتمية. الأمريكيون طبعا لم يكونوا يتطلعوا للبقاء في أفغانستان أكثر مما هو لازم، وبالتالي فإنهم غادروا أفغانستان. أما اليهود فنيتهم هو البقاء في فلسطين إلى نهاية العالم. لذلك لا يمكن أن نقارن مع احتلال الإسرائيليين لفلسطين الوجود الأمريكي في أفغانستان. مرة أخرى على الفلسطينيين أن يتفقوا على المآلات والنتائج النهائية، وكذلك الاتفاق على من ينبغي أن يمثلهم في هذه المساعي. الصوت انقطع من المصدر.
So you were stressing how dangerous it is to have divisions in the ranks of the resistance, and here we come to the third theme. We go back to Mr. Barghouthi. You took part in many rounds of negotiations between Fatah and Hamas. Do the Palestinians have a unified vision about liberation, national liberation? No, they don't. Otherwise, they have said that they are unified leadership. No, they have many differences. When we spoke about Afghanistan, we did not expect Afghanistan to compare between the Americans and the Israelis. طيب أخي طيب. So thinking that U.S. can solve our problems is not quite. We can see how that USA has abandoned those who supported her for 20 years and just left the country. So counting on USA about the Palestinians and their battle against Israel is not correct for several reasons, including the strength of the lobby, Israeli lobby, and because USA considers itself in a strategic alliance with Israel. As for the Palestinian forces are different in their strategies. Yes, I myself was a mediator between the Fatah and Hamas in 2006-2007 when he created the government of national unity, which only lasted 86 days. I think the dialogue will not be successful unless, before going into the dialogue, each party should have a real intention, especially in Fatah and Hamas, a real, sincere intention to accept 4 principles. In fact, 5 one. First, democratic partnership, that in the Palestinian ground there is not one unique force that can lead everything. This is very important to accept the principle of partnership. If each party thinks that's the only and unique force, the others are worthless, this will not lead to any national unity. Second, the second thing that should be accepted is the principle of the right of people to go to elections, to choose their own leadership by democratic elections. This is something not accepted neither by Israel nor by the USA. The leadership should be chosen by the people democratically otherwise cannot speak on behalf of the Palestinian people. This is the essence of our crisis now. The third point, there should be an agreement about to put an end to the divisions between Gaza and the West Bank, and to accept the principle that all Palestinians have the same rights and duties. Fourth point, to be aware that it's high time to move the power from Palestinian Authority to the Palestinian people and to create a unified leadership, of course, within the PLO. But in fact, PLO has now become just a tool in the hands of the Palestinian Authority. So the real importance should be given to the PLO, not the Palestinian Authority. The fifth important point is that the national unified leadership should be based on a struggle, the program of resistance. If somebody thinks that the only way out is negotiations and Oslo agreement and security coalition, this means that there will be no unity. So the presenter is saying so they should. These were the points for success of. Now the question is, Dr. Adnan Abu Amr. Do you think there's any change in the Palestinian resistance and might accept the two-state solution? The gentleman, I can hardly hear the gentleman. He speaks on with telephone. So he's saying that the occupation is continuing. The West Bank is no longer a state with full capacity on the borders, and there's no, and there are always checkpoints, Israeli checkpoints between in every few kilometers. The Palestinian Authority is really eroded and has no real force, and they're only occupied by internal differences and wars. This means that this two-state solution is something just like very theoretical and not real political possibility as a project. So even if there are positive intentions, one cannot really reach the solution that the people want. This because this requires there are so many different suggestions and alternatives. All these alternatives are presented do not give a real importance to the two-state solution. I think the present status quo means I can hardly hear the gentleman. So even the Europeans, he says, say the West Bank is not the same bank of 1967, and speaking about creating a state on it is something not realistic. So the presenter spoke about the role of America, USA, and so the question is to you, Mr. John Elderdice, the question to you. After the absence of Trump and Netanyahu, can Biden's administration put pressure on Israelis to put an end to this conflict, or his administration has their hands full of other issues?
أعتقد أنه سيكون من الغباء بمكان أن نتخيل أن الإدارة الأمريكية سواء كانت برئاسة السيد بايدن أو أي رئيس أمريكي سابق ستضع ضغطا كافيا على إسرائيل لكي تغير موقفها. ولا أعتقد أن الحكومة الإسرائيلية أيا كانت، الحكومة الحالية، الحكومة السابقة أو الحكومة القادمة، ستتعرض لضغوطات تدفعها لتغيير ما هو قائم في الوقت الحالي. ولا أرى أي دليل يشير بأن أي دولة عربية يمكن أن تقوم بأكثر مما قامت به في السابق، أن تتحدث عن الوضع ولا تفعل شيئا على أرض الواقع. ولا حتى أتوقع من أن تقوم روسيا والصين أو أي دولة أخرى بفعل حقيقي. الفلسطينيون إذا ما أراد الفلسطينيون أن يتطلعوا نحو تغيير فعليهم أن يتحملوا مسؤولية أمرهم بأيديهم. والفرق هو أن يقوم الفلسطينيون بأنفسهم بشأن الاتفاق على ما يريدونه، وأن يعملوا على انتخاب قيادة تعمل وبدعم شعبي من أجل التوصل إلى نتائج تفاوضية تصب في صالح الفلسطينيين. ولكن يؤسفني القول بأن النظر أو التوجه نحو إسرائيل أو نحو الولايات المتحدة أو الدول الأوروبية أو الدول العربية بعيدا عن الفلسطينيين سيقود إلى مزيد من الخيبات ومزيد من الإحباطات. وهذا يحتم على الفلسطينيين بأن يتولوا مسؤولية أمرهم بأيديهم. أتحدث عن الفلسطينيين في قطاع غزة، في الضفة الغربية، وحتى داخل التراب، وحتى الذين يعيشون في المهجر، بأن يتوصلوا إلى اتفاق فيما بينهم ويوحدوا صفوفهم وينتخبوا قيادة ممثلة لهم، وهكذا يستطيعون الوصول إلى النتائج التي يرنون إليها.
So now we have discussed the different options of two-state and the solution and other options. We now review some of the comments that we received on the website of Al Jazeera, and then we will hear what our guests say on this. On Facebook, a lady says the biggest mistake was this peace initiative, because all Palestine is Arabic and part of the Arab nation. We must refuse the status quo and count on the Palestinian resistance and the Arab resistance. Another person, a gentleman, said there is no alternative to the resistance that should be supported and strengthened. Another gentleman said, "What other solution do we have if you don't count on the resistance?" On Twitter, Khalid Ashur said the liberation of Palestine needs a one unified resistance. A lady says that the only way for us is the way and the path of resistance. As for Muhammad Sayyid, he says, "What peace? There is no peace." We are now back to our guests. This is what they say. Each one has 2 minutes to say what they heard from the social media. This says, yes, I agree with these comments. In fact, they confirm what we said. The peace initiative Arabic was stabbed in the back by those who began normalization relations with Israel without Israel putting an end to its occupation. So all the Arabic all the peace initiative has been torn to pieces. And I think the solution as the Palestinian popular resistance, and in addition to boycott and sanctions on Israel by the Arabs first and then by the world. Third, I think all the peoples of the world have experiences that when the Vietnamese negotiated, they negotiated while I continue their fighting. So the question is not either negotiation or resistance. No, they can do both things. Because even going to negotiation without resistance will obtain nothing. Anyone knows that. So I agree with what was said. What was said also by Jamal Abdel Nasser, that what's taken by force cannot be regained but by force. Now the question to Dr. Adnan, who speaks on the telephone. Yes, it's important to say that the Palestinian resistance does not have the will to be to use their military force in a mature way and should refer to political solutions later on. The Israelis are pushing Palestinians to have the only option of armed resistance. But after 7 decades of these battles, the Palestinians are politically ready as well as militarily ready to confront the occupation. But the Palestinians in general are open to any political solutions or proposals, uh, but at the condition that the alternatives be feasible and not only to gain time against the people. Mr. John Alderrice, the question is to you. What's your last comment on this?
لسنوات طويلة كنت زعيما سياسيا في إيرلندا الشمالية. واحد الأمور التي أنا واضح تماما بشأنها هو أنني لا أريد لآخرين من الخارج أن يملوا على الشعب الإيرلندي ما ينبغي عليهم القيام به. طبعا أنا لا أنوي أن أملي على الفلسطينيين ما ينبغي عليهم أن يفعلوه، فالفلسطينيون يجب أن يبحثوا عن أفضل السبل من أجل مستقبلهم، ولكن ربما هنالك نصيحة أسديها وهي أهمية التوحد فيما بينهم من أجل التوصل إلى الاتفاق بشأن ما يريدون أن يحققوه، وأن يتم ذلك من خلال قيادة تحظى بالدعم، وكل ذلك ينبغي أن يتم بروح السلام، فأي عنف يمكن أن يعود بالدمار والضرر على المجتمع الذي ينبع منه هذا العنف. إذا نصيحتي القوية هي أهمية الاتفاق فيما بين الفلسطينيين وأن يتفقوا على الزعيم الذي ينبغي أن يقودهم، وهذا سيجعلهم في وضع وفي موقف يمكنهم من التفاوض بشأن النتيجة والهدف الذي يريدون تحقيقه في نهاية المطاف.
We now come to the end of this program. Thank you very much for being with us. So she is thanking the guest, Mr. Barghouthi, and with his titles, and Dr. Adnan Abu Amr with his titles, and thanking you. Thank Dr. Ghada Al-Kirmi, the lady from Exeter University, and also thanking you, Sir John Alderrice. You are being thanked. You're on the screen with your titles. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Goodbye. We hope to see you again. You're most welcome. Bye bye.